Well, I want to say personally how much the three of these authors and human beings I admire. It's incredibly difficult, as you can probably imagine, to tell your own story, especially intimate, personal, vulnerable, powerful stories. It's a brave thing to do, to share those stories, but they're doing it with the hope of inspiring you, helping others who have been through what they've been through, sharing their own personal experiences. So congratulations to all of you. I'm really honored that you are here today joining us. So I'm wondering maybe if you could start by telling our audience, all your fans, why you decided to tell such an intimate account of your lives, because it obviously can't be easy. Cassandra, let's start with you. I mean, anybody who's been married a long time knows that road isn't always easy. And being married to a larger-than-life character like Pat Conroy surely had its share of challenges as well as gifts. So can you tell us what it was like to live with Pat, why you chose to tell your story in your memoir, Tell Me a Story?
Yeah, Pat and I were together 19 years. We met in what I like to think of as middle age. I was a year older than Pat, so I had already had my 50th birthday, and when we met, it was his 50th birthday year. And so it's a story of finding love. It's a love story. And after both of us had been through very difficult divorce. Of course, Pat would say, "Is there any other kind?" Because even I think if they are, very wanted on both sides and so forth, it's still a very traumatic experience. And we were looking at that as neither one of us was looking at that time. Believe me, it was the last thing I wanted. I finally got rid of one husband. Do I want another one? No. Do I want a larger-than-life figure that sucks up all the air in the room when he enters and, so forth? No, not that either. But these things, happen. Everything, I think, happens for a purpose. I really believe that. The way we met and everything that I talk about, I start the book the night I met Pat, and it does not have a happy ending. He died of pancreatic cancer in 2016. I did not set out to write a memoir. I was working on a cookbook at the time and telling a lot of our stories. Then he got sick, and after his death, and I promised him that I would go back to writing. I went back to the cookbook, and it was very painful because cookbook stories, you're not going to talk about somebody being sick and the problems that you have in a marriage or this sort of stuff. They're going to be fun things. And every time I would try to work on it, I would start crying, And so I think that I needed to tell the story of our life together. There was something urging me to tell the story, and it's also sort of a tribute to Pat as well. He had the most amazing, wonderful fan base, and I think touched so many lives. But he was an amazing, wonderful person, and I wanted his readers to know that. But I knew that if I was going to do this book, I think we have a tendency to sort of glorify someone after they're gone. I think it's a blessing in some way that we only look for the good parts, and I knew I was going to have to be totally honest. So it was very difficult. It was also difficult to write because I started it very soon after his death, and I was still deeply into the grieving process. So I've forgotten the question as well, but I think what inspired me to, and I was also hoping that the story would relate to other widows and widowers who had been through a similar experience.
And it's beautifully told. Thank you. So, Ryan, You were one of those rare people who set forth as a young man, actually really a boy, to become successful, famous, wealthy. But as soon as you reached your peak of stardom, addiction and anxiety led to you losing it all. I recently interviewed Ryan for a virtual event, and I was blown away by how together this young man is, to have been through what he's been through, lost all that fame, all that wealth, all that glory, but he didn't come across as harsh or bitter. He was actually someone who's grateful for where he's at, and he sends that message through his talks and through his book. I was really touched by hearing him, and his parents, I know, are back there, and obviously you did a tremendous job raising this young man because he's pretty incredible and special. But Ryan, I want to know, it's a really difficult journey to share. Why did you write Harder to Breathe?
Well, first off, thank you for calling me a young man.
Well, my son is his age, so he has to be really young or I'd be really old.
I thought about writing a memoir probably about 10 or 15 years ago because I knew that I had a story to tell that was unique. We started this band when I was 16 years old in my parents' garage, me and Adam Levine and two of our other close buddies, and we had gone from there to the biggest stages in the world over the course of a decade. But when I was thinking about writing this memoir about all of the stories that I had, I was really struggling at the time. I was suffering through the loss of that career, the depression, the grief that went with losing. Really, my whole identity was wrapped up in being the drummer in Maroon 5. I was looking to a bottle to fill that void. I just really didn't know who I was at that point. And so writing a book, even though it was something that I had dreamt about doing even before I was a musician, I didn't really know what the point of doing that at that point would be, because I was still struggling, and it was just going to be kind of a woe is me, look at what happened, look at what I had and look at what I lost. So then fast forward, in 2016, I quit drinking. I started this whole new journey of recovery, and I found myself doing one thing after another that was fulfilling and purposeful, leading me back to school to get a degree, a master's degree in clinical psychology, and become a therapist. And I was doing all this self-reflection and my own work, as well as learning to work with others and helping and being of service. And all of a sudden I realized I have a happy ending to this story. And there's a purpose for it now. Because if people can relate to my struggles and the anxiety and the depression and the alcoholism and the grief, and I can tell a story that's very honest and vulnerable in my experience of those things, and people can relate to it, then just maybe they could also see themselves in my recovery and find hope in that. So that was the purpose for writing the book when I did.
Beautiful. 7 years sober. Jesse, you and I did an entire 4-part series on the virtual platform Fireside about the challenges, many challenges you've had to face, including from being gay to being an addict to being sexually abused, challenges of ethnicity and all that entails, and so much more. I mean, there was really so much packed into your memoir, I'm Not Broken. What drove you to write about those incredibly painful and personal experiences?
Wow. Hi, everybody. My name is Jesse Leon. A little nervous. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, and thank you for having me and being a big supporter. I didn't write my book with the intention of ever publishing it. As you know, my book starts and ends at Harvard graduation and goes back 3 generations to highlight the stories of strength and resilience, in particular of women, indigenous women, and their journeys into this country and their struggles to hold our families together. But it also talks about my journey of being sex trafficked here in San Diego from 11 to 14 years of age. And at 14, when the authorities got involved, how the system basically failed me and my family, who did not speak English. And still, even though I was in state-sanctioned programs and in mental health, had a therapist, I still spiraled downward into the sexual exploitation, commercial sex trade of children in the streets, and drug addiction, and ended up homeless. So I started writing my book to answer your question. I got clean and sober March 12th, 1993 at 18 years old, so I'll be 30 years clean and sober in March. I've been a public speaker in recovery conventions for the last almost 30 years, and I would hear people say, you need to tell your story, write your story, and I never really wanted to. Someone in my family was dealing with an eating disorder at 11 years old after being rejected for a national search for a Disney audition. And me, while I was at Harvard and not mentioned in my book, I was bulimic. Being a survivor of the sex trade, my validation came from my body since I was a child. And so I struggled with my body and my weight for a long time, and I wanted to share my journey with this family member, and I was not allowed to. I was told that I couldn't disclose my story. So I respected that, but said, well, screw you, I'm gonna write my book. And I decided to just start writing after my dad died. And it became 700 pages, single-spaced, of blah, documenting stories of strength and resilience to inspire the next generation of my family to not give up, in spite of the challenges that many of us face in low-income communities and communities of color. And then I got a call. People inspired me to start trying to find an agent after hundreds of rejection letters and people telling me that no one would ever want to hear my story from a male of color perspective and that my writing was mediocre at best. I met some African American leaders in the Hollywood industry, and they introduced me to my agent, and that agent believed in me. And a few months later, I'm in a bidding war between Penguin Random House and HarperCollins. So book came out. I'm Not Broken came out in August. No Estoy Roto, the Spanish translation, came out 3 weeks ago, and it's been a crazy journey. So I wrote the book to inspire others to not give up on hope, and that our stories need to be told. And my hope is that my words are a space of refuge and hope and peace for people that read it, to know that we're not alone. And our stories need to be told, especially from a male and male of color perspective. So.
Thank you. And you mentioned you didn't write the book until after your dad passed away, and that kind of leads to my next question is because when you write memoir, especially ones with really personal, intimate details, you, I'm sure, think about the people that are going to be affected by this book, your family members, your close friends, anybody you may be writing about. And I'm wondering if you guys had that experience and who it was that you were maybe nervous or afraid about writing about, how they would react. How did you address that when you decided to write your book, Cassandra?
Well, I learned from the master. Pat, his whole career was based on telling the stories. That's why I want to call my book Tell Me a Story, telling the stories that needed to be told, but people were afraid to tell. And he actually inspired me personally to tell my story, which I did partially. I think I've done it in some ways in each of my books, but in my second novel, my first book that came out was totally nothing personal. It's about two young men, their search for sexual identity. And I had, before I met Pat, I went from one extreme to the other. I was married to a preacher. And so for 2 decades, and I had quite a struggle there finding my own identity. And Pat really encouraged me to tell that story of my search for my own identity. And once I found out that through writing and fiction, you can really get back at people, you know, I couldn't stop. I loved it. But that was through fiction. Telling true, you know, with memoir is a totally different thing because you can always deny, You know, like I got my brother-in-law good in one of my books. He had just left my sister for another woman, and I found a copy of my book. I swear to God, y'all, this is the truth. At his place later, where he had underlined all the places that I got it. I didn't even know he had read it. But with memoir, I had a totally different experience in that I had all of Pat's family to think about. His daughters, he had been estranged from his youngest daughter for 17 years, and she had come back shortly before his death. And I was really nervous about how I would present that situation. He had had a stepdaughter who had been involved in a court case where she accused her father, her biological father, of sexual abuse, and that came out. I mean, there was so many things that I had to figure, how am I going to do this? One way I knew I was not going to do it, and I've heard people say this different ways, but I've had a lot of people say, did you show them the book first? Did you ask them? Did you tell them you were going to write? God, no. Why would I do that? No way. So I did determine, and I did reach out to the family members and say, I am telling this as I remember it, as it affected me, and I will be as sensitive as I can to your part of the story, but I did not, want to talk to anyone about. And the story has substance abuse, it has estrangement, it has a lot of these things in it that people don't like to talk about, And then I had a really come to Jesus moment too when I sent the completed manuscript into my editor. She called me, like it came on Friday. She called me Monday after she had read it, and she said, I really like this. I learned so much about Pat, and it's always been one of my favorite operas, blah, blah, blah. I know absolutely nothing about you after reading this book. And I was thinking, uh-oh, does that mean I've got to tell some things about myself that, also I had not revealed before, didn't talk about and so forth. So it's writing fiction is a lot more fun. Trust me. If you can fictionalize it, do.
Thank you. Ryan?
When I wrote the first draft of this book, at the request of my girlfriend Sean, I left her and our relationship largely out of it. She's a very private person. She said, I don't want to be dragged back through all of the drama of everything that was in our lives in those years when I was on the road and everything. Despite the fact that I had met her when I was in college, and she was with me through when we made the album Songs About Jane and went on the road, and through the alcoholism and everything, I just wanted to keep that to myself, honoring her request. So I took this first draft to an editor, Stephen Power, who gave me a few really important notes of feedback for the second draft. One of which was, he said, I feel like I watched the movie Castaway. You're alone on this island going through all this stuff, and at the end of the movie, you tell me, oh yeah, there was another person on the island with you. And I'm like, wait a second, there was a witness to all of this, and this character's barely in there? It's like, that's the key role there. If they make a movie out of this, that's the role that everyone's going to want, right, is the girl, the love story. So the second draft, I had to have a really tough conversation with Sean and talk to her about what, it was important to me that I was going to be as honest and vulnerable in writing this book as possible. And it made me realize that there are relationships that I want to be as equally honest and vulnerable about in telling those stories, because they're relevant to me and my psychology in how I was relating to the people around me. So there's, I went deep with that stuff, and it's the relationship with her, it's the relationship with the band, the guys. Those are public figures, there are other celebrities in the book, and there's those stories. I didn't want to make anyone look bad, that was not the intent of this book. It's not a salacious tell-all or anything like that. So I wanted to be respectful of those relationships, but at the same time be really honest. And there was a fine line to walk in that regard in terms of telling my truth and how it relates to me and my psychology, but not crossing that line into a place that was going to be inappropriate. So hopefully I was able to walk that line in a way that was helpful to the narrative, but not to the point of crossing that line.
Yeah, accomplished. It was a beautiful book, and I remember reading the part about, I don't know why this got to me so much, I think as a mother, when Adam Levine had to basically fire you from the band. And my heart just broke. I thought his best friend since childhood, they built this incredible thing together, and then his best friend had to fire him. And it broke my heart, and I was so thrilled when I saw that he wrote the foreword for your book, because I said, oh, they're still friends, yes. cheering them on. Jesse.
Oh, wow, this is a tough question. My mom. So the book is not only a story about my life, but also my mom's journey and what I put my mother through. And so I got blessed with an amazing team that supported me in making sure that through the publishing process and editing process, that I didn't want it to be interpreted as trauma porn. I didn't want to, and I wanted to protect my mom as much as possible, because it's my mom. She's 81 years old. I'm her caregiver. And I heard the comments over the years of, how could your mom not know what happened to you? And so when you read the book, you'll see how everything that I went through while keeping my parents somewhat in the dark and not knowing how to help me and reaching out for help everywhere, but never being recommended drug and alcohol treatment. And the system's never helping my mom. So she has a copy of the Spanish book. She has not read it. I'm afraid for her to read it, because at her age, I'm afraid she'll relive a lot of the pain. So I came out on Primer Impacto. Primer Impacto is like the 60 minutes for Spanish TV. And they did a 8-minute segment, which is a huge deal. And when she watched it, she just cried. And I was there with my brother holding her. But what she's been getting out of it is the messages of hope and strength that my mom's character has given other mothers through our journey. And so my biggest concern was my mom, and making sure that I try to protect her as much as possible from any type of criticism, especially from individuals that don't understand Latino family culture. And that was my biggest struggle. For me, I'm an open book. I'm an open book. I was afraid that some of my high net worth family clients whose philanthropy I manage would fire me because they wouldn't want anything to do with someone who was sex trafficked and drug addict. And even though I'm in recovery, I was afraid. But they've been my biggest supporters, so thanks.
That's wonderful. And I know you've written a whole book about your life, so we don't want to give away all the details that we want readers to read for themselves, but can we pick just a section of your book maybe to talk about that either was really difficult to write, or you were freed in writing it, or it just impacted you in some profound way that you'd like to share? Maybe we can start with you, Jesse, this time.
Wow. That's a really hard question, because people that have read my book know that there's moments that you think, oh wow, he's gonna make it, and then doesn't. Oh my gosh, he's gonna make it, and you love me and you hate me, and you can't stand the decisions I'm making, and then you forget that I'm a child. And I wish I could read it, but there's a scene where I tell my mom at 14 years old, by myself, with no MFT person, no psychologist, no school social worker, the police officer dropped me off, I'm covered in blood, and I have to tell my mom and she has to sign this stack of papers to find me help from the state to deal with my rage and anger at 14. And my mom doesn't speak English well, so I'm trying to translate to my mom in Spanish that I'm being molested. And we don't have a word in Spanish for molest. Molest means molestar. Molestar means to bother. I'm a little Chicano kid. I don't speak English well. I don't speak Spanish well. I speak Spanglish. And I'm trying to tell my mom I'm being molested. And I finally scream out, I'm being molested sexually. Me están molestando sexualmente. And that scene was probably one of the most intense and difficult to write, but most importantly, read. So I did both audiobooks in English and Spanish. And I'm being asked now, hopefully, to start reading audiobooks for other authors because I have a nice deep voice. But when you listen to the audiobook, and I highly encourage you to, a lot of the emotions come out. And so I hope I answered that question.
You did.
So,
Yes,
yeah.
thank you.
Well, for me, I had a hard time for a long time relating to the things that happened to me in my journey in leaving the band as trauma, right? Because I thought of trauma as something that was, you know, a life and death situation, the kind of things that you're talking about. It was a lot of therapy for me to realize that trauma is relative to the person. And in writing this book, I realized this was sort of the last kind of therapy I needed to go through. And writing some of those sections was a process of dealing with the trauma of some of those moments that were things that I had panic attacks about for years afterwards. And the first one that leaps to mind was the first thing that I thought about writing about when I sat down to write this story. It happened on stage in front of like 5,000 people in London. I was more hungover than I'd ever been in my life. I was shaking like a leaf. I already had a lot of anxiety, and I had to learn this song on the spot because we had done a different cover song the night before to sing. I don't usually sing, I'm usually the drummer, but I had to go to center stage and sing. And I got to center stage shaking like a leaf, and I sang one line, and then all the lyrics went out of my head. And I was just up there kind of feeling like I was drowning for the next 4 minutes, trying to regather myself. And you know, that doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world, but it was like in the middle of everything that I was going through, it left a lasting impact. I had never been somebody who had panic attacks before that. I had never been somebody who related to anxiety in a physical way like that, where like I thought I was going to pass out. I was just seeing stars and my hands were shaking. And so there were a lot of things that would trigger that memory at a different point in my life where those panic attacks would come up. And so writing about that story, when I sat down to write it, it just took me back to that place immediately, and it was painful. But I realized I had to go deep into it. I had to really go to those feelings and process them in the writing of it for my own purposes. But then ultimately, if somebody else can read it and realize that they're not alone in having that kind of anxiety and going through those panic attacks, they can see that there is a process to work through it. And so that's why it was very fulfilling for me.
These stories are so powerful, aren't they? Goodness. When I was working on the book, when I got to the point of Pat's illness and death, he died 6 weeks after his diagnosis, which my doctor said later was a blessing, because by the time they found the cancer, it was far gone. But the days, the final days with hospice was almost a holy experience, and we had a couple of really mystical, for lack of a better way of explaining experiences during that time of his dying. And I wanted to tell that, but that's really, really hard to do. I realized when I got into it, then I thought, do I want to tell it? I mean, it's going to sound kind of woo-woo or something, Can I even come close to describing it? And that was an important lesson for me as a writer, because what I was doing is I was going outside, of myself and the experience, and doing what I've done all my life to my great detriment. What will people think? My generation, I was brought up, that was all, my mother pounded, oh, you can't do that. What will people think? And so with this experience, I had to just tell the story that I wanted to tell and let the chips fall where they may. And I did, I did it. And the responses that I've had from readers have more to do with that, some of those experiences that I described, than anything else that I've heard from. This is something that others had experienced and sort of felt the same way. Well, I never said anything about this, but we had a very strange, mystical experience, say when my grandmother died or something like that. And I realized, well, it's more common than I thought, to have these sort of things. I won't tell you what it is, but you read the book, you'll see. And there were a couple of those, and I'm glad that I did maybe listen to the better angels and include that in the book.
Thank you. And the reason I founded Adventures by the Book, and I do what I do, is because I really, truly believe in the power of books to connect people on a human level. And I think you especially see that when you're reading memoirs and you feel like you're going through these personal journeys with very human people that you wouldn't otherwise know. And you learn to be fearful with them and to cheer them on and to worry about them. I'm even actually getting emotional about it because I read all their books and they just touched me so deeply. But I want to know from you guys the connection you have with readers. Maybe share something that you've gotten out of writing for these readers, something a reader has interacted with you about that's touched you or made you think how grateful you are that you wrote your book and told your story. So maybe we can start with Ryan.
Sure. Well, writing this book was just kind of like the next indicated action. That's a phrase we use in recovery a lot, the next indicated action. Just put one foot in front of the other and do the next thing that's indicated as the most positive step you can take in this moment. Early in recovery, I was volunteering at a recovery center and realized that being of service, giving back, being able to reach people and tell my story and be of support for people that are just starting their journey was just about the most fulfilling thing that I'd ever experienced in my life. And that includes, winning Grammy Awards and being on stage, playing on Saturday Night Live and stuff like that. So it was just such a different place to be, to have this added element of service. And writing this book was the logical next step in terms of telling my story the way I would in a meeting or in a recovery center and trying to help people. So every time that somebody reaches out to me, whether it be when I'm doing an interview or on social media, the era we live in now, you have access to the people that you're touching. And people from all over the world. I mean, there's Maroon 5 fans that know about this book now that are in Thailand and in Australia who send me direct messages and talk about how much either that album that we made touched them back then, or how much this book now has affected them and made them realize that they're not alone. And so that really is like just the icing on the cake for all of this and the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Aww. And parents back there, the parents, are you just eating this up, loving every minute of it? Cassandra?
Yeah, I mentioned, connecting with readers with this book, and it's a love story. So I know that I've connected with some readers with that way, but it is also very much a story of the grief process, when my husband died in 2016. That was 3 years after I had lost my closest friend in the world, my sister. And she had also died of cancer just 3 years previously, and a couple of years before that. I was very close with my father because my mother had died years before, and my sister, two sisters, and I had sort of taken care of him, and he we were very close. So I lost three of the closest people in the world to me within a few years. So this whole process of the grieving, this sounds such a cliche, but it is a journey, and it's something that we all go through. Every single person is going to lose someone you love at some point in our lives, and so this is a connection, that we all have. So what I've heard from readers, of course, I've heard from so many who've lost spouses, and I also, hear mothers who have lost their sister, parents, and so forth, and this is the common thread, I think, that I connect mostly with readers with.
Thank you.
When I feel like a failure, that I haven't sold 8 million books, or that, I would love to write a children's story to go back to being that 8-year-old innocent boy who used to love coloring books, and maybe one day it becomes a cartoon like Shrek, right? When I feel that I question why I do what I do or why I did, I've never been on social media. I'm new to it. And even that made me feel like a failure. And I got a message right when the book came out from a woman student from Yale who is also a survivor and immigrant family, and said, thank you for giving me voice and giving me hope that I can stay in school and that I can graduate, and that we do go from surviving to thriving. We do go from living in trauma to being triumphant. And other authors, Sandra Cisneros is on the cover of my book. She read my book and got a personal message from her saying thank you. So sometimes when I feel like I'm not selling, all these millions of books, why did I do this? I'll get these glimpses of hope, of people telling me, thank you for giving me voice and helping me not give up one more day, not kill myself, and just giving me hope to go on one more day. And that's what keeps me going with my readers. And then I get a lot of messages from mothers, Latina mothers, that oftentimes don't have time to read. We hear the criticisms of our community of, well, your communities don't read. Well, sometimes our moms work 2 to 3 jobs. You have to come home, you have to cook, you have to do all these things. And I'll get these messages from moms, Latina moms, or a message from somebody who says, I'm sending you a message that my mom wanted me to send you on social media because she doesn't know how to use Instagram. My mom wants to tell you A, B, C, D, and please say hi to your mom. Your mom is a strong woman. And sometimes those are the little stories that help me keep on keeping on. Yeah.
I think that's a perfect way to finish up. And thank you, Jeffrey Blunt, for reminding me of this Cassandra King Conroy quote that says, writing is more than a calling. Writing is more than a vocation. In so many ways, it is an act of courage. And I'd like you to stand up with me and cheer these 3 authors for their act of courage in writing this book. Thank you. Cassandra King Conroy, Ryan Dusick, and Jesse Leone.